From kids who wanted to live without any rules to sudden outbursts that led to devastating ends, history is unfortunately full of child unalivers who committed horrific acts of violence against their own family members. Today we're going over 10 children who unalived their families and how they reacted when courts didn't buy their pleas. David Brom.
A man who was expected to spend 3 consecutive life terms in prison is no longer behind bars. In 1988, David Brom was convicted of killing 4 family members with an axe.
When firefighters and police stepped into the quiet Rochester, Minnesota home in February 1988, the scene was almost beyond description. 4 members of the Brom family, Bernard, Paulette, and 2 of their children, were found unalived, and another son was found critically injured. Neighbors were stunned. The Broms were known as a devout, hard-working Catholic family who blended easily into their community. Almost immediately, one question hung in the air. Where was David, the 16-year-old son? The search for David did not last long. Within a day, word spread that he was seen at school earlier, talking to classmates and hinting at something terrible. Police eventually located him and placed him under arrest. The idea that a teenager could wipe out nearly his entire family in one night stunned not just Minnesota, but the whole country. What investigators pieced together was that David and his father had clashed the night before over music, behavior, and discipline. In the early hours of February 18, David used an axe to attack his parents and siblings as they slept. His younger brother survived but carried lifelong injuries. The trial that followed was as much about psychology as it was about guilt. The defense argued that David was suffering from severe mental illness, pointing to his erratic behavior and the sudden eruption of violence. Prosecutors countered that he had acted deliberately, showing awareness and even discussing the incident afterward with peers. For the public, the legal tug-of-war raised difficult questions. How do you punish a teenager for something so extreme? And what role should mental health play in determining the outcome? In 1989, after a closely followed trial, David was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree unaliving and sentenced to life in prison. Because he was a juvenile at the time, the capital penalty was not an option. He received the mandatory life sentence, with parole eligibility decades in the future. Minnesota law at the time did not allow for true life without parole for juveniles. But in practical terms, his punishment meant he would spend the majority of his life behind bars. Today, the Brom case remains one of Minnesota's most infamous family tragedies. Nicholas Browning.
Why would I jeopardize? You put money into it. I have a very large, or had to have whatever, inheritance coming to me.
When Nicholas "Nick" Browning entered the Baltimore County courtroom in 2009, he was not the boy his teachers and friends once knew. At just 15 years old, he sat quietly, head bowed, offering only a muted apology as the judge handed him 4 life sentences. The case began a year earlier, in February 2008, when Nick staged the discovery of his family's passing. He called 911, sounding distraught, but investigators soon noticed cracks in his story. Under pressure, he admitted that he had used his father's handgun to shoot both parents, John and Tamara, as they slept, before turning the weapon on his 2 younger brothers. Shockingly, after the attack, he spent the night out with friends as if nothing had happened. What made the crime harder to comprehend was Nick's background. He was a Boy Scout, an honor student, and came from a comfortable, stable household. Prosecutors argued that he had long resented his father's strict rules and had even talked with peers about wanting to be rid of his parents. With parole eligibility after 23 years, he will one day face another hearing, but the quiet, detached figure who accepted his sentence remains etched in memory. Nehemiah Griego.
I am sorry for taking our parents and our sins. I wish I can take it back.
In January 2013, New Mexico was shaken by the case of Nehemiah Griego, a 15-year-old boy who carried out an attack on his own family inside their Albuquerque area home. By the end of the night, his father, Greg, his mother, Sarah, and 3 younger siblings were all gone. It was one of those moments that left even seasoned investigators stunned, not only because of the ages of the victims, but also because Nehemiah had been described by some who knew him as a polite, church-involved teenager from a family deeply rooted in their community. The crime unfolded late at night and into the early morning hours of January 19, 2013. Armed with rifles from the family's collection, Nehemiah first shot his mother as she slept, then turned on his younger siblings. Hours later, when his father returned home, Nehemiah ambushed him as well. After the attacks, he reportedly spent some time with friends, telling them that his family had passed away. Investigators would say later that Nehemiah had been fascinated by firearms from an early age and had talked about violent fantasies, though people around him hadn't believed he would act on them. In early hearings, he sat quietly in the courtroom, rarely showing visible emotion. Journalists reported that he often looked straight ahead, answering the judge's questions politely but without much expression. The legal battle dragged on for years because of his age at the time of the crime. New Mexico law required the court to weigh whether he should be sentenced as a juvenile or as an adult. This distinction was critical. As a juvenile, he could only be held up until age 21. As an adult, he faced decades behind bars. In 2019, after extensive legal wrangling, the judge ruled that Nehemiah would indeed be sentenced as an adult, citing the severity and deliberate nature of the crimes. He received 3 concurrent life sentences, plus an additional 7 years. The Nehemiah Griego case remains one of the darkest examples of family violence involving a teenager in the United States. Robert and Michael Bever.
The boys allegedly stabbed their parents and 3 siblings to death last summer. They are both due in court next month.
In July 2015, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, became the center of national attention when 2 brothers, Robert Bever, aged 18, and Michael Bever, aged 16, launched a late-night assault inside their family home. By the end of the rampage, 5 members of the Bever household were gone. The parents, David and April, along with 3 of the younger children. 2 others survived, a teenage sister who was badly injured but rescued, and the youngest child, who was left untouched in her crib. Investigators later revealed that Robert and Michael had been collecting knives, body armor, and other weapons in secret. Their goal was not just to attack their family, but to use it as the first step in a much larger spree. Prosecutors would later argue that the brothers had been inspired by violent online forums and wanted notoriety through mass violence. Chillingly, notebooks and computer files showed detailed plans to expand the destruction far beyond their home. Robert, the older of the 2, was portrayed as the ringleader. Michael, younger and more impressionable, was seen by the defense as someone coerced and dominated by his older brother. Yet prosecutors countered that Michael was far from a passive follower, noting that he participated fully and never once tried to stop what was happening. Inside the courtroom, their behaviors contrasted sharply. Robert often came across as cold and even arrogant, showing little sign of remorse. Reporters noted how he sometimes smirked, sat upright, and seemed defiant while listening to testimony. Michael, on the other hand, appeared quieter and more withdrawn. He kept his head down for much of the trial, occasionally whispering to his attorney but rarely displaying outward emotion. While Robert's defiance unnerved observers, Michael's blank detachment was just as unsettling. The trial testimony was harrowing, especially from their surviving sister, who recounted the chaos of that night and how she overheard the brothers talking as they carried out the attacks. The jury found both brothers guilty of multiple counts of first-degree murder. In 2018, Michael was handed 5 life terms plus 28 years, with a chance of parole. Robert, who had already pleaded guilty the previous year, had received multiple life terms without parole as well. Together, the Bever brothers left behind one of the darkest chapters in Oklahoma's history. Colin C.J. Haney.
Ask for forgiveness for my crimes and mistakes. I will to make sure that people understand that my mistakes in my past are something that will not.
What could have motivated C.J. to eliminate his entire family one by one? While the defense argued that C.J. was an otherwise good kid who had gotten mixed up in the wrong content online, the prosecution argued facts. C.J. planned the attack. He waited for his family members to come home one after the other, and that's when he executed his plan. The first 2 to go were his mother and sister, then came his other sister, then his brother, and lastly his father, who miraculously survived after being shot in the foot. Today, all that remains of the Haney family are 3 members: the oldest brother, who was in college at the time of the attack, a deeply traumatized father, and a 16-year-old who now has a record. CJ was sentenced in Tooele County's 3rd District Court. The charges included 4 counts of aggravated unaliving for his mother and 3 siblings, and 1 count of attempted aggravated unaliving for shooting his father. The judge, Teresa Welch, handed down 4 consecutive sentences of 25 to life. This adds up to a minimum of 100 years in prison. The judge commented that CJ not only deprived his family of their lives, but also deprived himself of a life with them, the people who loved you most. Cody Posey.
Authorities moved him to an unsecured reintegration facility here in Albuquerque, a place where he'll transition back into society.
Former ABC newsman Sam Donaldson was the first to testify at Cody Posey's trial. He claimed that he had long believed the Posey family was the perfect all-American family. Paul was the breadwinner, working on Donaldson's ranch. Tryon was a housewife who took care of the 2 kids, Cody, aged 14, and Melia, aged 13. Sam claimed that while he believed the family was perfect, appearances can be deceiving. After all, in 2004, Cody was convicted of unaliving his entire family. Sam testified in favor of Cody, however, and was moved by the teen's testimony that detailed years of emotional and physical harm at the hands of his father and stepmother. The night before he finally snapped, Cody claimed that his parents had once again tried to harm him, and when he didn't comply with what they wanted him to do, his father beat him the next morning. According to the teen, he acted on impulse after he couldn't deal with the trauma any longer. Cody shot all 3 members of his family and then buried them in a manure pile in the backyard. A few days later, after community members noted the family's absence, Cody tried to stage the scene as a burglary. It was Sam, actually, who arrived at the home and found congealed blood splatters all around, leading him to the mass grave. Cody readily confessed when he was questioned and claimed that he had no other choice. His trial was emotional for a lot of reasons and divided everyone. Should Cody be sent to prison for the rest of his life, or should he be given another shot at redemption? The presiding judge believed that Cody wasn't a horrible boy and claimed that after serving his time at a juvenile facility, Cody would be allowed to return to society at the age of 21. In 2010, Cody was released, and he's since maintained a strict private life away from the public eye. Vincent Parker.
Yes, he's written letters explaining what has happened. He pretty much said he just snapped. He was very angry, and he doesn't remember it.
A polite young kid who'd made the honor roll at school and was altogether very sociable and well-liked. This is the story of how, in 2013, the last person you'd ever expected, Vincent Parker, bludgeoned his parents for no apparent reason. In December 2013, just a few days before Christmas, Vincent skipped school one morning and went back home, where his mother, Carol, was going about her usual business. Finding her alone, Vincent pepper sprayed his mother before stabbing her in the eye and then beating her until she passed away. According to investigators, Carol was unrecognizable when they found her. Vincent then called his friend, Miriam, and told her that he would have to cancel their plans that day. Miriam claimed that he never once gave any indication that something so severe had just happened. Then, to spend time while his father was at work, Vincent drove the family car around the block. Once Wayne Parker came home, Vincent proceeded to beat him within an inch of his life. He then left the family home to travel to the police station, where he claimed that his father had beaten him and that he reacted in self-defense. What he didn't know, though, was that Wayne had survived just long enough to call 911 and report his son as the unaliver. Forced with facts, Vincent had no other choice but to confess to the crime. But why did he do it? According to his cousin Morgan, Vincent had only just come out to his family as gay, and that was something his parents had taunted him for. However, Vincent himself claimed that his parents weren't mean to him in the slightest, and that no argument had precipitated the attack. While he admitted that his church-going parents were strict in several ways and likely disapproved of his sexuality, there was no indication that Wayne and Carol were bad parents to their only son. The defense tried to argue that Vincent should be shown leniency because he acted in the spur of the moment, motivated by immaturity. However, the judge believed that Vincent needed to be made an example of and sentenced him to 40 years behind bars. Erin Caffey.
I've got an entire notebook here where people are saying it is your idea to kill your parents.
In 2008, 16-year-old Erin Caffey plotted with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Charlie Wilkinson, to unalive her entire family, her parents and 2 younger brothers, aged 8 and 6. While that in itself is shocking, an ex-boyfriend of Erin's later claimed that she'd plotted the same with him after her parents disapproved of their relationship as well. The Caffey household was devoutly religious, regularly attending Mass at the Miracle Faith Baptist Church. With a population of less than 500, the rural community of Alba, Texas, was known for being closely linked to the church and everything it stood for. One of the things that Penny and Terry Caffey expected of their children was staying away from anything they regarded as sinful, and that included Erin wanting to date. So, when her parents disapproved of her relationship with Charlie, the two plotted for a month on how to eliminate the problem. On the night of March 1st, 2008, Charlie was led into the house by Erin, who came with his friends, Charles Wade and Bobby Johnson. The trio went inside Erin's parents' room while they slept, stabbed Penny repeatedly, and shot Terry. They then went inside the boys' room, where they did the same. However, miraculously, Terry survived despite being shot 5 times. He managed to crawl to a neighbor's house after his had been set on fire, where a 911 call was placed. That same night, Terry identified the 4 people involved in the crime, and they were arrested within hours of the incident. According to prosecutors, they believed that maximum punishment was necessary for everyone involved in the crime. Charlie and Charles were convicted of committing the actual unaliving and received life sentences each. Meanwhile, Erin waited outside in the getaway car with Bobby. Erin was given life in prison with the possibility of parole when she's 59. Bobby was given a 20-year sentence. With the weight of what they'd done finally coming over them, Erin seemed visibly upset and anxious during the trial. In a move no one saw coming, Terry, the sole survivor, held her hand in court and told the judge that he'd forgiven his daughter and everyone involved in the crime. Erin remains incarcerated to this day, and Terry's gone on to write a best-selling book that detailed the events leading up to the incident, has remarried, and now lives as an advocate and minister. Derek and Alex King. On November 26, 2001, firefighters were called to the scene of a massive fire in Cantonment, Florida. Local resident Terry King's trailer had been set on fire, and neither he nor his 2 sons, Derek and Alex, were anywhere to be seen. Within minutes of containing the fire, one of the firefighters emerged from inside the trailer and claimed that he'd found a body, an adult male. That would have been Terry. But where were Derek and Alex? Were they still alive? It would take the police a few days to track down the 13 and 12-year-olds at their family friend Rick Chavis's home. Now the police had 3 suspects in connection with the case, but who had done it? According to the boys, they'd gotten fed up with Terry being harsh on them, claiming that he'd stare them down and sometimes spanked them. They claimed that they bludgeoned him with a baseball bat while he slept and then set fire to the trailer. However, a few days later, they recanted their statement and claimed that Ricky had been the one who orchestrated the whole thing. Ricky was guilty of a lot of crimes. In addition to harboring the boys and cleaning the blood off their clothes, he also had a record in connection to harming the younger of the 2 boys, Alex. While the court believed that he had some role in Terry's unaliving, they believed the boys did the deed themselves. They'd eventually fess up and were tried for 3rd-degree unaliving. The trial was an emotional one, not just because of the horrific nature of the crime, but because the attorneys, on either side, acknowledged that the kids were scared and out of their depth. They hadn't anticipated the severity of the crime they'd committed, and desperate pleas were made by the defense to go lenient on them. In the end, however, the court sentenced the boys to serve 8 years in prison. While they'd since been released for their father's unaliving, Derek went back to prison for violating his parole sometime in 2011, and Alex passed away from a substance overdose in 2024. Sarah Marie Johnson.
Of the 1st degree, answer guilty. guilty on both counts of first-degree murder.
In 2012, Sarah Marie Johnson tried desperately to have her sentence reduced. As of 2003, Sarah's been serving 2 concurrent life terms without parole at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Institute since the time she was 16. However, while her lawyers tried to fight her case, get her a reduced sentence, and try for a shot at parole, her family members resisted it. They claimed that she was a threat to society and that the crime she'd committed should never be forgiven. Likewise, Sarah was denied a reduced sentence, and the court upheld its original verdict. What had this 16-year-old done in 2003 that was so horrific that even her own family couldn't forgive her? Well, the people of the small town of Bellevue, Idaho, woke up on September 2nd to shocking news. Alan and Diane Johnson had been unalived in their own home, and the proposed unaliver was the man who had been renting out their guest house. Their daughter, Sarah, managed to survive somehow, and the police were on the lookout for the renter. It would have been an open and shut case, since the unaliving weapon was a gun that belonged to the renter. The only problem was that the renter had been out of town for a week before the attack occurred. It took a matter of hours before police noticed cracks and holes in Sarah's story, and that's when she fessed up. She'd shot her mother in the night while she slept, and then went into the shower to shoot her father. The police discovered a latex glove with Sarah's DNA all over it and immediately arrested her. But why did she commit such a horrific crime? According to friends and family, Sarah was at odds with her parents because they wouldn't let her date the local narcotics dealer. Sarah, growing up to be rebellious and defiant, believed that the only way to get what she wanted was to eliminate her parents from the picture. Friends and family spoke at her trial, with Sarah's aunts claiming that they would never forgive her. They claimed that she had shown no remorse throughout the trial and that they hoped she would never be allowed back into society. So, when Sarah tried to fight for a changed court decision, the court recalled her aunt's statements from 2003 and believed that justice had already been served.